That kind of introduced me to the world of the paranormal, something I'd always thought about but never really actively entertained or investigated. And the initial episode that I listened to on Blurry Creatures was episode 57 with this guy named Tim Alberino, who is described as a modern day Indiana Jones. And what Tim Alberino does in this episode is lay out the case for why people here on Earth are not alone in the universe, and how if you go through Genesis 6, there's an argument that there is a different race of people like entities that are in the universe, and they are called the sons of God, and God that we all think of in America does exist, and he knows who they are, and they openly rebelled against him, and they procreated with people on Earth and then created giants and all this kind of stuff. So it's just like it's a crazy story to even like look into if you're a believer, and a lot of believers are closed off to this idea. Yeah, well, we'll see what the attorney says. Anyways, on to some more positive stuff, because that is what we're going to be talking about today. Positivity, negativity, and
all about the positive.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about quantum entanglement, God, string theory, and manifestation, and a bunch, and even the leaking basement that I've got going on at the current time.
Because those are all connected for sure. Let's go.
I think they are. So, you know, you and I both have been listening to the Sean Ryan show for some time, and
we have.
Recently, he had a guest on named Billy Carson, Dr. Billy Carson, PhD. Can't remember all of his credentials, but he's got them from MIT as well as Harvard. So obviously the dude is pretty dang smart.
Might know a few things.
Yeah, you know, which is why when I started listening to this episode, I was like, okay, this guy is worth taking seriously. He's got the bona fides. And clearly he not only knows what he's talking about, but he has a really cogent thought throughout like all of existence. Really, that's what we're talking about here is existence. So for those who are going to come into this conversation, we're going to roughly and probably terribly summarize some of this guy's talking points. So I encourage you to go check it out on the Sean Ryan show. Billy Carson is the guy's the most recent podcast where we're kind of riffing off of. But there's some really interesting stuff because, you know, for myself, I've been a believer for a long time. There was a period in my life, probably about 6 or 7 years, where I had walked away from the faith and even tried to actively leave the faith and couldn't do it despite my best efforts. And about 2.5 years ago, I started listening to this podcast called Blurry Creatures, which I've introduced pretty much everybody that I know to, which is about Bigfoot. And if you're watching video, you can see I've got the Vanish Bigfoot shirt on right now. I do love me a Squatch or a Bigfoot or a Yeti, whatever you want to call them. And that kind of introduced me to the world of the paranormal, something I'd always thought about but never really actively entertained or investigated. And the initial episode that I listened to on Blurry Creatures was episode 57 with this guy named Tim Alberino, who is described as a modern day Indiana Jones. And what Tim Alberino does in this episode is lay out the case for why people here on Earth are not alone in the universe, and how if you go through Genesis 6, there's an argument that there is a different race of people like entities that are in the universe, and they are called the sons of God, and God that we all think of in America does exist, and he knows who they are, and they openly rebelled against him, and they procreated with people on Earth and then created giants and all this kind of stuff. So it's just like it's a crazy story to even like look into if you're a believer, and a lot of believers are closed off to this idea. So this Blurry Creatures podcast for like captured my attention. I ripped through like 200 episodes in the better half of 8 months and really kind of got my feet set in the existence of the paranormal, aliens, all this kind of stuff, Bigfoots, you name it. And also like the Illuminati. Not really. It's not even the Illuminati. It's more like the Masons and stuff like this. And so Billy Carson, this highly educated guy, comes onto the Sean Ryan show. And for those who are not familiar with Sean Ryan, he's a Navy SEAL who recently converted to faith and has like had a ton of really solid guests in the paranormal space on his podcast lately, because he's opening and he's questioning. And coincidentally, he actually lives in the same town as the guys from Blurry Creatures, which is not really connected at all, but I thought that was pretty funny. And so he's got Billy Carson on, and Billy Carson starts talking about hidden knowledge and the Masons and like string theory and all this kind of stuff. And it was so fascinating that I had to, like, I texted Nate while I was on my drive back from Florida to Iowa, which took forever, and also kind of plays into the stories that you have to listen to this. and I listened to it within the span of 6 hours, and it literally changed my life. I've listened to hundreds, if not thousands, of podcasts, and this is probably one of the top 10, if not top 5 podcasts I've ever listened to. So
it definitely makes you think.
Yeah, it makes you think a lot. So essentially what this guy says is that the world, we've seen 4 major civilizations exist here on Earth that have come and gone. So like these are the Atlanteans, this is stuff that predates the Atlanteans, this is the Egyptians and everything like that. And all of these civilizations have had advanced technology. Now, if you're listening to this and that's the first time you've ever heard this kind of stuff being talked about, one of the chief arguments for this is that if you look at the pyramids, for instance, the pyramids are constructed in such a way that no modern machines could have ever assembled them on their own. Like, there's just no way. The size of the bricks are just so enormous that there's no way that with our best machinery we could have moved them and placed them in this arrangement to make this pyramid. On top of that, they make a point that a lot of the material in the bricks in this pyramid come from places that are far away from the actual site in Giza. So for us to even get them to the place where they're going to build a pyramid, like that alone too is impossible. And then the other thing is there is the pyramids that we all know in Egypt, and then there's pyramids all across the world. And all of them align with the constellations, and all of them are within like millimeters of like exactness in terms of like how they align with other pyramids, like just some crazy stuff. Like I won't be able to really do a good job of talking about the intricacies of these pyramids, but suffice it to say,
but bottom line is that these structures that are in all these different places in the world are essentially built exactly the same way, but they're in all these different spots, and to your point, they're all perfectly aligned with constellations. Like it's hard to believe that those were all just randomly put there by different groups.
Yeah, and so Carson talks a lot about that kind of stuff. He's just like, hey, there's these emerald tablets, there's all these ancient texts, which, like, nobody's going to argue that these texts aren't real. Like, if you look at the Code of Hammurabi, if you look at the Epic of Gilgamesh, which, you know, they've all been around for thousands upon thousands of years. Most people, including, like, Christians as well as modern historians, say that we have a history that goes back roughly 6,500 years. And these guys are saying, no, it's far beyond that. Like modern Homo sapiens, 200,000 years ago. So kind of the point here is like I'm not going to try and fit this into like a biblical lens necessarily, not try and make it a case for, hey, this could be true and the Bible is true also. I already believe that. I'm not going to try and convince anybody of that on here because I don't have the ammo for that, nor do I have the mental capacity to do that without having prepared extensively for it. The things that I thought were really cool about this, specifically what I've been going through a lot lately, is this thing that he talks about where, have you finished it yet, Nate? I can't remember.
Yeah, I got all the way through it.
Okay, so he talks about manifestation, and he talks about how there's this quantum entanglement. I think they're joined, right? He talks about those both at the same time?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so quantum entanglement says that, well, first there's an experiment that was done that I've heard about before, which is in quantum theory, which is called the double slit experiment. So scientists take this machine and this electromagnetic microscope or whatever they're called, and shoot these electrons through this little box, and they shoot them into the back of a box. And when the camera's on them, they're able to find that the electron just looks like a little dot, but then the rest of the time they're able to observe somehow that it's a sine wave. So anytime the camera's on it, it's a dot. When it's not, it's a sine wave, which means that it has two states of existence. So quantum entanglement says that you could take two opposing forces like in an atom, like so you got an electron and a proton, and you could separate them, move them all the way across the ends of the universe, and if one moved up, the other would move down because they're related in the quantum realm, which is like a different dimension. And then he starts talking about how people don't understand the power of manifestation. Specifically, like he talks about it in a positive sense, but I took it. I listened to that. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. Like, you know, there's a whole thing in the Christian faith where people name it and claim it, and they manifest their destiny. And there's an element to that I might speak to. But like for me specifically, it was around the negative aspect. And as I was listening to this, I had just been driving back from Iowa. I was like, I had listened to a 6-hour podcast, and then I went straight into this one. And we got stuck in a bunch of traffic the whole way up. All the snowbirds, including myself, were coming back from Florida, headed north. So traffic was terrible. We got stuck in traffic outside of Atlanta for 3 hours, and I just kept getting more and more and more negative. Now, it didn't help that I had 2 crying kids and a cranky wife in the car, but I just realized, like, the more I became negative and focused on how angry I was or how whatever, like how anxiety inducing this whole trip was and how ridiculous it was, the angrier I got. And I just realized that that's actually a pattern in my life. My wife has said this thing, and I know I'm sucking all the oxygen out of the room right now, but this is why it was so impactful for me. My wife,
No, this is great, man. Keep going.
yeah, my wife has said that bad things like really kind of always happen to me. Not terrible things, but bad things. Like I'll buy a sauna. I bought a sauna a couple years ago. My friend bought a sauna at the same time based on my recommendation. My sauna has broken no fewer than 7 times. His has never broken once. I buy a cold plunge. My cold plunge breaks 2 times. Like the actual cold, the chiller unit breaks. The actual plunge, which looks like a kiddie pool, breaks. I go through a bunch of stuff. My basement floods. Like just crap like that. Last year I bought a car. The car that I bought was bought sight unseen. They deliver it to me. The sunroof's broken. And then we try and get it fixed. It can't get fixed. They're telling me that even though it's under warranty, Kia is not going to cover it because somebody else had tried to fix it. You know, just like raked over the coals. I ended up having my car for 3 or 4 months, and I'm paying payments and insurance on it the entire time. I don't have a car. There's just like a long list of things like that happen. And what I realize is, like, I'm not going to say that I'm directly responsible for this, because bad things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. It doesn't really matter. But I was, in my mind, like I'm creating these negative events. And so Friday is when I'm listening to this podcast and make this decision. Hey, I'm going to stop being negative. Like I didn't do it right then because it was late by the time we got home.
Still in that Atlanta traffic.
Yeah. Or to the hotel. We didn't get to the hotel like 11 or something like that. And I went to sleep, and then I woke up and like I just had this shift. And the rest of the day, like, you know, some stuff happened, nothing crazy. I just had this different attitude. Like, all of a sudden, things that I would have said that were kind of negative. Like, and it's not even negative, like, oh, this sucks. Like, I would just say stupid stuff, like negative things about other people, like, in their cars and their driving. Like, the whole day before, I was just like, what is up with this person just cutting me off? They're driving like an idiot, you know, how we all do when we drive. And when that stuff would come to my mind, it wouldn't pass through the filter of my mouth. It just wouldn't come out anymore. And it wasn't so much that, you know, since then I haven't said anything negative. Like I've said a few things, but like now there is a filter, excuse me, where I'm realizing, okay, this is in my mind. It doesn't need to come out. I don't have to say anything. And as soon as we got home, no joke, this is more to the story. Like Christmas Day, I found a leak in our ceiling, cut a hole in the ceiling, and found out like that. I thought a pipe had burst, a humidifier that had been tipped over leaked through the floor into the ceiling. And then 2 days later, another spot in my house brings a leak in the ceiling. And so I cut a huge hole in there, dodge a bullet, figure out, okay, it actually isn't as bad as I thought. So I never got those repaired when we left for Florida. So I have 2 gaping holes in my ceiling. Saturday night we get home. I made this new shift. And no joke, I get home. We put the kids into the bath. Or one of the kids into the bath. My son's downstairs, and he's like, Dad, there's water pouring down the ceiling in the basement. So completely unconnected to the other 2 holes. And I'm like, okay, wow, that's really interesting. And normally I would freak. I'd get really mad. I would just be incredibly upset about, like, the circumstance. Like, this is stupid. I can't believe this. Like, I dealt with it. Like, I felt that rising in me, and I dealt with it in a way that I'd never dealt with before. And I've tried to troubleshoot it 3 times since then, and it hasn't leaked since. And I'm like, okay, that's really weird. I don't know what happened. I still have no idea what happened. Like, I haven't ripped any holes in the walls, but, you know, there was only 1 bath, and there's only 2 possibilities. It was either leaking behind the wall or it was leaking at the drain. I've tested both of those at least 3 times, nothing. And then even today, I've got water coming in the basement in, like, multiple corners and spaces just because it's raining so hard here in Iowa and about to snow. And I'm just like, okay, yeah, no big deal. And I like something changed, and I realized it was around this idea that Billy Carson injects, that like it's not so much like this spiritual sense. It's like the universe is a universe of laws, and he talks a lot about like the other dimensions, the 4th dimension, 5th dimension.
He's talking about frequencies too.
Yeah, and frequencies. And I began to understand that what we do, the intention that we put into things, the attention to detail, what we say has so much more power than I ever realized. And then it also made me understand like how much more powerful God is than we realize. And so, that was those are my big takeaways, and we can talk about the manifestation aspect here in a second. But it was just so cool because what he's doing is he's showing the scientific rationale for why if you say something negative, you're producing a frequency and you're basically speaking something into existence. And if you refrain from doing that, it's not that bad things can't and won't happen. It's just that like you're not directly responsible for it all the time.
Right. No, I definitely, I definitely have seen enough in my life that I definitely believe that the things that you say do have a certain level of power or ability to create things. And I've got some examples of that I'm more than happy to share, on a number of levels. But, the other thing that was really interesting, and I know we're not going to go deep down this path, but the other thing that really jumped out at me was all of the different things that he pointed at in that podcast that validated the existence of God, and how when we, and this is the part that starts to get really out there, where he was talking about right now we're experiencing like being in these avatars, like we're in this avatar experience right now here on Earth, and how there is like I think at one point he referred to it as like there's a source, and like when we pass from this existence into the next, like that we go back into that source, right. And that all the things that he's seen as all the things he was talking about, that all that did was further validate like the existence of a creator. So that was really fascinating, because usually when I listen to podcasts or I read things that start going in the direction that he goes in, they don't necessarily always go that way. They typically a lot of times go away from like there being a creator or not, or God. Like they don't necessarily always go that direction. I thought that was super fascinating, and he had a lot of really great validating points around that. So that's, again, kind of, if anyone's interested in listening to it, it's a great podcast to go check out. And like you, I'm not gonna attempt to really dive into the specifics of it, because he covered
it was
an insane amount of information in only, I mean, it was like 2 hours, but it was like
it felt like 10 hours of information just.
I'm gonna go back and listen to it again, because I really want to digest more of that. But on the manifesting thing, I look at it. There's like what you can say and positive, negative. There's also the things that you can do that with a higher level of intention, like writing out goals and things that you want to accomplish. I mean, like right now, like I'm living out an existence that I actually wrote out going back to 2016 is when I started doing it, and I was religious about it, like daily, very specific daily directional process that I learned from another guy who's a really high level thinker. And his name's Brian. Oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed. See,
Brian's gonna watch the podcast and
leave a comment. This is gonna drive me nuts. Brian Grasso. Like he's brilliant. He's actually brilliant. But I learned a very specific daily directional kind of like journaling process where like you on every day you go about, basically you write out. There's this first part called minding the gap, where like you're essentially looking back on the previous day and you extract lessons and things that happened, but like there's no negativity around it. It's like what happened, and then what is it that you learned from it, and like how does that change? How does that change you? Like, so it's just finding the positive things in everything that happens. So it's not positive, it's not negative. It's just learning. Like it's learning that enables you to adjust and recalibrate what you're doing from day to day. But what ends up happening though is like you do inevitably give even the negative things a positive spin. Mm-hmm. And so it started to change the program that was my brain, or is my brain. And it started to reprogram my brain to literally anything that happened. I immediately started recognizing and thinking about how, this is how I'm going to benefit from this thing. This is great. Like, and it changed So where like normally you can slip into a victim state, you can slip into like this victim's mentality, and that's a slippery slope. Like it creates an activity, it makes you want to zone out and not do things, and so it delays taking action on things. What you might do like in 30 seconds, you might do 4 days later, even a week or 2 weeks later, depending on like how you process through those dips or those challenges. And then the next part of that process was what were the 3 things that you wanted to have in your life that are not currently in your life? And then within each of those things, what were the 3 simple things that you would do like today? Like, so each day you're writing this down. Like, what are the 3 things that I can do to work towards this day? It doesn't matter how small it is, how big it is. What are the 3 things that I think I can do today to move that thing forward? And it again reprogrammed my brain on how I looked at everything, and then it changes the way you speak. So you start speaking as if like these things are happening. These things are happening. Like, what are the 2 to 3 things you want to have in your life in the next 2 to 3 years? So one, you're taking the pressure off of yourself to like make it happen as fast as we want to. I think lots of times we don't realize how long it takes to actually accomplish things, but kind of go back to my original point. Like, I did that process like religiously from 2016 to early 2020. And I ended up actually going through some really intense business stuff where, some of the things that like I had written out and were happening kind of like ended up falling apart. And I took that as like, oh, this isn't meant to be, this isn't supposed to happen. And I didn't start speaking that way. I just kind of went into a little bit more of a rebuilding recovery phase. And funny enough, like, those things, it ended up being not the exact way that it was supposed to happen. Now it's showing up in a very different way, but all of the things that I actually wrote out and I was speaking and thinking have all actually come into reality. Like, and it wasn't the exact way that I thought. It ended up being in a different way and with different partners. But it's just wild that like something that like I was very intentionally writing and wanting to create and thinking about and working towards and talking to people about, like almost all of it, like has, if not all of it, has actually come into reality over the course of the last few years. So that's been my most direct experience with it. And I've had other things that have happened, like weird things, like, I've told people for years, this is hokey. People probably make fun of me for it, but like I've always been a big fan of Matthew McConaughey. Like, I think the guy is a very prolific thinker.
What's wrong with that?
I mean, I think it's maybe just because of the rom-com thing. People, like, I think a lot of people used to dig on him pretty hard. That might not be true anymore. But
I think you're just sensitive to your man crush, and
it could be.
A lot of people
it could
like
be.
that
No,
guy.
I'm secure. I'm secure in my man crush. Guy's a prolific thinker, like just lots of style, like, definitely like a rebel, like doesn't act or think normally. And that's just something I've always had an appreciation of the way he does it. But I used to tell people, I don't know when it would come in conversations, but I used to always say like, oh man, like one of those days I'm going to meet that guy, get to hang out. And randomly I ended up running into some people that were a part of a project that was pretty cool. And I was standing there joking around with them. It was an organization called, man, I don't know why I'm blanking on this too. It's been so long since I've even thought about this. They basically pair celebrities with nonprofits or different charities. And we were at an event that they had put on, and we were just sitting around talking, and I was joking around with them like, oh hey, like I was like, if you guys ever do one of the, because they basically do big experiences. So we were at the premiere for the last Jason Bourne movie with Matt Damon, because that was part. They paired. Matt Damon's organization was like water.org, and so because through that organization they paired Matt Damon with water.org, and then part of the experience, if you donated to like that particular thing, you potentially could win these spots at this event. Now my business partner didn't win them. He actually just donated enough to where he got spots at this event, and we went to it, and we're standing there talking around with this group, and I was joking around like, oh man, if you guys ever do an experience like this with Matthew McConaughey, let me know. I'd love to actually help out. I don't need to go to the event, but if it's something I can help support, that's cool. And they all like stand there looking at me with blank expressions, and they're like, that's kind of crazy because like we're doing that like in the next couple months at the Darrell K. Royal Memorial Stadium in Austin, Texas, at a UT football game where we're doing an experience like in their suite. And I think even specifically said if you're ever doing something at his suite, because I'm went to UT, big Longhorn fan, and so I didn't think a whole lot of it. I was like, oh, that's really cool. And then 2 weeks later, they hit me up. They're like, hey, do you want to be our representative, like in his suite, and get to go, be up in his suite for the game? It was against like Notre Dame or something like that. And I just sat there, and was like, well, obviously yes, but again, like just one of those examples of something that I was just throwing out there, like, oh, this is going to happen eventually. I don't know what it is, and then like it actually literally happened. And I can point to a number of times where that's happened in my life. So I've personally experienced it. I mean, I don't have a lot of scientific data like Carson does to or was it Ben Carson?
Benny Carson.
Benny Carson. Yeah, so I don't have all the scientific data like he does, but I've experienced that myself. I've also experienced it in the negative way. I've got someone in my life who is negative all the time. And we had cut down these palm trees in the back of the back of his yard. And there was a lot of construction going on in this area at the time, and so we were going to take all the palm fronds and like basically throw in the trunk of the tree and throw it into this dumpster that we'd been given permission to actually do it. We knew the guy that was the builder, and all day he kept saying, he's like, oh, I don't know if this is a good idea, like if we're probably gonna get caught, like the one time that I'm gonna do it, like is the time that like there just happens to be like a cop like back here, and like they're gonna catch us. And I was like, you got to stop saying that. Like we're just gonna go drop off. It's not gonna be a big deal. And just all day just kind of kept saying that and reiterating it. And then even right before we got in the car, he's like, I don't know, I just got a bad feeling like we're gonna get in trouble. And we hadn't even pulled off our street. Like we had just literally pulled off the street and making a turn to go to the next neighborhood where this big dumpster is. And there happened to be an off-duty sheriff's deputy, coming from a party, and he pulls us over and wants to know where we're going. I was like, man, and that's another example where I've seen this individual like literally create things like that, like where it's like hard to even believe it happens, but like I've watched it happen a number of times. So like both on the positive sense and like on the negative sense, I've watched that multiple times in my life.
Yeah, it was even called out for this a couple weeks ago, and you remember that, and I thought that the person who had called me out for it was probably off base and that they weren't correct in their thinking. I am going to reevaluate that a little bit, to be completely honest. The manifesting part, this one is this is an interesting one. So I remember in the time where I was trying to actively lose my faith, I came across The Secret. Everybody has probably seen or heard of The Secret, which is, it talks a lot about the law of attraction. And that whole theory is what like the kind of energy that you put out into the universe will come back to you. So, or especially if it's positive and you're like thinking of something hard enough, it'll come back to you. So Carson says that, yeah, that kind of stuff can happen. Now, I wanted to be careful in my thinking around this because the Bible clearly states that that's not really within your control, right? It says in the book of James, I think it's in James 2, something to the effect of like, people often say, hey, tomorrow we're going to go do this, next year we're going to do that, it's going to be great, we're going to make some money, we're going to build a business, and it's not the case that you can accurately predict what's going to happen because tomorrow you could die, is the gist of that particular text. So I was starting to think about this manifesting, and a couple things that I was thinking. One is like, yeah, we can probably, through intention and attention to detail and expectation of outcome, make something happen, something that you have focused on. And there's another saying, it's like what you focus on grows. So if you focus on negative things, negativity in your life grows. If you focus on positive things, things will grow. And of course, what you measure, you can actually grow too. That's another philosophy. If like you're not measuring results, then you're probably not going to get the results. So I was like, okay, we could probably do a lot of really cool stuff in our business. Maybe if I just start focusing on a $1 billion business, just to use a nice number, we can get to that place. We can have a 10-figure business. Sure, that's totally possible. I believe that. I believe that. I don't know if I believe we could manifest it, but I think that through intention and right thinking, we could do that. And of course, like my caveat here is that like if God wills it, like that's kind of the thing that the Bible says. If the Lord wills, we will go and do this. Because this is again where like the Carson thing was really interesting. Essentially, what he's saying is the dimension that we live in right now. We live in a 3D reality, right? First dimension is a straight line. Second is a piece of paper, just a flat surface, and 3 is like a 3-dimensional rotation. when you look at a fourth dimension, that is a tesseract, which is basically a cube unfolded where time can be, like any point in time can be seen by the individual in the fourth dimension, and you can access it from any angle. Like, it's super crazy to think about. And speaking of your favorite actor, Matthew McConaughey in Interstellar goes through a tesseract. So they actually use that that approach to fourth dimensional. Or I guess in that case, it's a fourth dimensional application of how you're looking at a tesseract. So those kinds of things are totally possible. And as you expand into other dimensions, and as he talks about frequencies, you can do things in a 3D reality that would make people who are in a